think we can begin, right? Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for your attention. We're going to get started and we can begin our meeting. I'd like to, so I should welcome everyone to the brand new Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting. It's even though it's listed as meeting number 15, I can assure you it's the first time we're meeting as TAC, or TAAC. We'll have to land on exactly how we're going to acknowledge ourselves as an acronym, but I kind of like TAC. We are meeting today on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat, and Toronto is still home to many diverse Indigenous peoples. I'd like to ask that we begin our proceedings with an introduction of those who are in the room so that everyone who is here will be able to know who's present. Start with your first name and your last name, and I'm going to go through the inner horseshoe area, and then we're going to move to the outside. So why don't we start on the inside here? Go ahead, Monica.
Hi, I'm Monica Winkler. I'm representing the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work.
Hi there, I'm Wendy Porch. I am representing myself. I'm a committee member, but I'm also the manager of episodic disabilities initiatives at Realize.
And I'm Martin Curcels, and I'm representing myself, and I'm a member as well.
Yin Brown, I can represent the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians and a committee member.
Janice Dick, City Clerk's Office.
Great. And I'm Kristen Wong-Tam, Chair of TAC.
Nicole Cormier, Accessibility Consultant, Equity, Diversity, and Human Rights Office.
Rahima Mola, Vice Chair.
Terry Lynn Langdon.
Darren Cooper, Committee Member.
Joe Napper, Committee Member.
Stephanie Osario, Committee Member.
Lisa Wong, Councillor Wong-Tam's office.
Yeah, we're looking for, yeah.
Karina Pryor, I'm with Municipal Licensing and Standards.
Wonderful, thank you. And then on my right side?
For the last.
Yes?
Lynn Genova, Clerk Secretary, Committee Support.
Okay, wonderful. So we introduce ourselves, just. Do you want to just speak into the microphone?
I'd also like to let you know that we also have Scott Wiley here from Toronto Police Services.
Wonderful, welcome. So we introduce ourselves in such a fashion to make sure that everyone is aware of who's actually physically in the room. For those who are joining us through the building, through the CCTV cameras, and for those who are actually in the committee room. So we can go through our agenda and let's see what we obviously need to hold items that do have speakers. So item number 1 is the chair's report. We are going to receive the chair's report shortly. We're going to have item number 2, the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee Working Group updates. All the members of all the leads from those working groups will be ready to report back. Item number DI 15.3, accessibility of Toronto Canada with Love events. I don't know if there's any speakers to this item or if this is, actually we have a presentation, I believe, from the Director of Arts and Culture, so we'll hold that. DE 15.4, abuse and misuse of accessible parking permits. We're going to hold that because we have the TPS who's here, and I know that there's probably opportunities for discussion. TE 15.5, accessibility in shelters. We're holding that. We have a speaker on the item. TE 15.6, disabilities, issues related to Toronto policing in Toronto. Are we ready to address this matter? Do we need to hold it down to speak? Okay, so do you want to go ahead, Terry Lynn? Oh, like right now? Yeah, we can just move to adopt the recommendation in your letter.
Well, I think the recommendation was to first have a conversation, right? Because there's several.
Okay. So why don't I hold that down for you? And I know that you also have a motion that needs to be tabled.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll hold that as well.
I wanted to also speak to the item briefly.
Okay, yep, not a problem. We will come right back to it then. And then TE 15.7, City of Toronto Public Appointments Process. This is a letter from our committee member, Stephanie. Is there any requirement for discussion? Should we move ahead and adopt the recommendation in the letter?
I think we want to hold that for discussion. Yin and I were talking, we wanted a bit of clarity around how we've worded it.
Okay, then it's held. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving right back to, then almost everything is held. Moving right back to 15.1, the chair's report. I will be happy to deliver that report to you right now. In the month of May, I moved that the Community Development Recreation Committee refer a report that's known as the State of Accessible Recreation be brought to this committee for consideration. And the report will also be providing specific details around wait lists that are specifically tailored and affecting people living with disabilities. So that may not come to us in the same time as that report, or it will be here in September altogether. But you will have a chance to take a look at the state of recreation and accessibility of services, and that report will tell us how many people in Toronto are living with different mobility requirements, who are on wait lists for recreation services. That's what it's about. So you can anticipate that, I believe, in September. Also, Accessibility Awareness Week in June. Monica, thank you. You brought this to our attention that the Honorable Carla Cultrell, the Minister of Sport and Persons with Disabilities, declared May 28 to June 3rd National Accessibility Week, which will celebrate, highlight, and promote inclusion and accessibility in our communities and workplaces across the country, which was a wonderful initiative on behalf of the federal government. Unfortunately, it doesn't give us a lot of time to organize anything too big this year, but at the very least, what we have done is I've asked the protocol office to provide a proclamation so that we can at least try to recognize that week and share information about the things that the city is doing, the work of this committee through social media and through the corporate communications team. And then hopefully for 2018, we will have an opportunity to do something bigger and much more meaningful. The third item on my report is specifically to address the accessibility parking permit and the report from Toronto Police Service. And I won't get into it too much because we're going to have a fuller conversation about it shortly. But the report from the Toronto Police Service on the Toronto Police Service Board, the abuse and misuse of accessible parking permits, was considered by the Executive Committee, and the following motion was approved. City Council requests the Government of Ontario to make a complete review of the process, conditions, and other matters related to the issuance, renewal, and use of accessible parking permits and the legal enforcement aspects of same, and that local city councils, police services, and disability support and advocacy organizations, among others, be consulted on the present inadequacies and future improvements which could be made. So any recommendations coming from TAC will go directly to City Council to be considered with Executive Committee recommendations. So we really have to provide our insights and feedback to that. At the same time, almost concurrently, Councillor Mihevik has also moved a member motion, which will be voted on at City Council next week, to ask city staff to explore the creation of a second-tier municipal assessment tool for issuing and endorsing accessible parking permits. So that is a member motion that's going directly to City Council. It doesn't necessarily come to us, but city staff will be asked to just explore the feasibility. I won't provide comments on that because I don't have too many things to say about it at the moment, other than the fact that we probably need to find a way to streamline the process to make sure that those who really should be using those accessible permits are getting them, and that there is active enforcement for those who shouldn't be. And then finally, you will receive in your inbox an email from Melissa Wong from my office around the Canadian National Exhibition and Accessibility. They have been very diligently working to make sure that the CNE, all their services and facilities, are going to become ALDA compliant. It's a fairly extensive update on their behalf. There are at least 13 or 14 points of new actions that that their board is recommending, and I've now forwarded to you, and hopefully you have a chance to read it, and we can also provide comments afterwards. But it's a bit too broad for me to capture all 14 of those points in my remarks. And so with that, that concludes my chair's report, and if I can have a motion to receive. Thank you very much, Monica, and all those in favor? None opposed? That's adopted. Thank you. So item number 15.2 is the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee Working Groups update, and this is very exciting because I know that you've all been very busy chatting amongst yourselves and meeting, and so I'm going to request that the lead of the Communications Working Group provide us with an update on the work that you've done so far.
Thank you. The Communications Working Group met on April 6th, and we discussed two items, the first being civic engagements, and the second being promotions around the new branding of TAC. In terms of civic engagement, the motion that's on the agenda is really the result of that recommendation, and, that discussion. And the questions that we have really relate to what we put forward, and we're hoping that a presentation will be made in the future where we can have questions around the development of strategy and what will that look like in terms of training and education for staff, and the possibility of the Communications Working Group being able to provide feedback on that strategy. The second being around promotions, and with us adopting a new name for the committee, it's important that the group felt that it was important to develop a logo and think about ways of promoting the committee. The one thing that we did discuss was the possibility of staff working with creative services to develop that logo and to develop a strategy on how to promote the committee, and then the working group providing feedback. So that was it. Our next meeting is on May 29th. Thank you.
Darren, thank you very much for that work, and what a great idea those initiatives would be. Thank you. Employment Working Group, we are expecting a report back.
Hi there. So in terms of the work from the Employment Working Group, we're a little bit on hold at the moment. So as we discussed at our last meeting, the Employment Working Group submitted a request for a presentation on a number of things related to employment at the City of Toronto. And we have been waiting basically for that presentation in order to establish a baseline for our understanding and to determine priorities and next steps for the committee. So my question is, I don't see it on the agenda for today. I wonder if we could be provided with an update as to when we might expect to see that presentation.
Okay, so thank you very much. So the report back from the Employment Working Group is to ask for a presentation of the city's current work, is that correct?
We asked for it at the last meeting, so there was a letter, there was a motion.
Yep.
And we are just waiting to have the presentation. As I expressed at the last meeting, the committee believes we would like to have that presentation first so we can establish a baseline for our understanding and in order to be able to prioritize our next steps.
Wendy, just to clarify, because I don't recall, was there a report back date for them, that request? Oh, is it for this?
We had asked for it to be presented at the next meeting.
Okay. Yes, okay, so thank you. Okay, so there will be a follow-up to the director, and then we will be able to come back on when those, when their presentation will be delivered. It's not uncommon that, that there's a request of performance, and perhaps even a report back date, that sometimes it doesn't make it back on those dates. Councillor Davis?
I'm wondering, to expedite it, if it would help to have that meeting with the committee as opposed to the full, or the subcommittee, instead of the full committee. Like if there was,
Can I ask
like
you
I
to
can't
speak into-
imagine HR staff wouldn't be quite willing to meet with the subcommittee.
No, and I think that's the purpose of the working groups, is to have meetings on topics like that. So it's quite possible that could happen.
So, sorry, can I clarify? And I thought this was all a matter of record, so I just want to clarify what we discussed. The subcommittee met and discussed, I think there's about 8 points that we went through at the last meeting, where we requested information about things like what is the current state of employment for people with disabilities in the city? What are the procedures for requesting accommodations? So there's a number of them set out in the minutes. We would like, as a subcommittee, we don't want the presentation just to the subcommittee. The expectation is that the presentation comes to the larger committee, but the subcommittee can then go away and sit and talk about what the next steps are. So as a committee, we certainly intend to work on employment primarily, but there was a general consensus, certainly offline, that we don't have a lot of the information that as a committee we would like to have around employment within the City of Toronto for people with disabilities. So the request is not to have a subcommittee have a small meeting. We still, I think we stand behind our request for the broader presentation. For me, it's, I don't see any kind of ill will here. I just am not clear on what's happening next.
So let's see if we can provide Wendy some clarity. The request that came, the motion that was adopted and turned into action, has that request gone forward to the director of HR at the city? Okay, so have we received the reply yet?
I'm not sure what the projected timelines would be for a presentation at this point. I'll have to follow up for the...
So the clerk and Nicole are saying that the request went out. They have not received the reply, and they're not sure of the anticipated presentation date yet. So there will be a follow-up based on this discussion to see if we can get them to this committee by at least, I think it's September, our September meeting. Okay, so I'm sorry about that. And if there is any support material that can be shared with the committee beforehand, I think we can certainly try to do that.
Can I just comment? It would be great if we could have any kind of materials that are supplemental shared with us beforehand. We had scheduled a number of meetings, in fact, and we only put the last one on hold because we were anticipating the presentation. So.
I think that's a very reasonable request. I don't expect that you'd be able to do a lot without understanding what the baseline conditions are, so thank you. So I believe Nicole and Janice are going to look into that for you. Okay, so, and thank you, Wendy. We have the Housing Working Group. Who is going to be reporting back from that? Oh, yes. Hi, Terry Lynn.
Hi. So people have a copy of the working group report on housing. And just a couple of things. I think the primary thing for us is that as a subcommittee, we would also like a request for shelter supports and housing to give us an update, because shelter supports and housing from the City of Toronto was previously here, but it was well over a year ago now. I did also want to read, I did get an email from Deidre Boyle, who is at she's a programs coordinator at the Homeless Initiatives and Prevention Services. And she did want the committee, the broader committee, to know that because of recommendations we made at a previous meeting, that it was really helpful for the new Bloor Street Men's Shelter that opened, and they actually delayed the opening of the shelter to make it more accessible in terms of turning radius and things like that. So I did want to let people know that some of the things that we're doing on the subcommittees is getting done. And just a couple of items here, I guess. Continue to advocate for progressive policies for persons accessing shelters that need support services, i.e. attendance or any kind of a support service that someone with a disability might need if they're accessing housing and shelters within the city. Look into ways and means to make housing connections more accessible, review sections of the Toronto Accessibility Guide, and provide updates and suggestions where needed. Discussed including developmental services sector as much as possible, and youth and special populations. And the last, there's a couple of items there that we understand that Anna Bilo is the chair of the Accessible Housing Committee, and we'd like to engage that subcommittee in some of our work in the future. And of course, we also went over a mandate. So the mandate that we settled on was to improve the accessibility and access to housing within city-run services throughout Toronto. This includes services and supports for people who are homeless or underhoused or inappropriately housed, shelters, group homes, apartments, and other housing.
Great, thank you very much, Terry Lynn. I can see you folks have been really busy as well. The request for an update from SSHA, do we, just as a question to staff for clarification, do we have to, we don't need a motion, it's just a simple email requesting that they appear before us?
I've already let them know, and they're
Okay.
happy to attend in September.
Okay, great. Oh, September is becoming a very full, full meeting. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. And then the same thing with respect to engagement with the Affordable Housing Office. Is it, what would that look like, Terry Lynn? Is it a matter of sitting down with the chair, or perhaps a meeting with the chair as a first initial step? Yeah, you talked about wanting to engage the work that this committee does with the Affordable Housing Office. I just wanted to ask, what would that look like?
Yeah, so it's the Affordable Housing Committee, I guess, and it's Anna as the chair of it. I think it would be helpful to for her to come to the committee to just say like what the work is, just so we know where to go with that. But at the same time, we, as a subcommittee, as a subcommittee, we can also meet with her as a first step if that's easier, because I know the agendas are filling up.
Just to, thank you very much. I think that perhaps it may be, if there is a request for them to come to this committee, then we can request that Sean Gadden, who leads the Affordable Housing Office, can come to this committee and provide a sort of a public presentation. Yeah, would that make sense?
Yeah, sorry. When you say Affordable Housing Office, are you talking about housing connections? Are you talking about
They would be working together generally. Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Councillor.
Maybe it'd be useful to have both the Affordable Housing Office and Shelter Support, SSHA, come to the September meeting, because they're two separate streams. One is primarily creating new affordable housing, and the other has to do with they are the service managers for all of the affordable housing functions, including, all the homelessness and accessibility, SSHA.
Okay.
So there's two sort of separate streams. Maybe they can both come.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification. I'm happy to do, the subcommittee would be happy with either.
Okay, so Nicole has just made a note that the invitation to have staff come before this committee will go to both SSHA as well as the Affordable Housing Office. But it's a great suggestion, so I'm glad that we've been able to clarify that.
Okay. Thank you.
And thank you for the update. Transportation Working Group? Yes, go ahead, Monica.
Hi, we just had our first meeting on May 17th? No, May 11th, I'm sorry. And through that meeting, we discovered that we still needed some back information as to what the previous subcommittee did. And thankfully, Yin had a bunch of stuff on her computer that she sent to us. So we've all just been looking at them, and we haven't really set anything forward yet. But going through it, there are things that, that I think will be on the list. The new Sidewalk Cafe Design Manual, they're reporting back to Public Works in the fourth quarter. So I think it would be a good idea to get an update on where that stands, because they have presented to us before, and just in case things have changed drastically. Also, I'd love an update on what's happening with Wheel-Trans and all the changes that they were making, because that's something that was going to be very different, because they're trying to streamline the whole thing and bring in different persons with disabilities to be allowed to use Wheel-Trans. The accessible parking permits, definitely we'll probably look at what happens with that. Wayfinding also seems to have been something. So we're working, we haven't had a chance to talk about any of this, so I'm just going by what the committee did last time. And we would like to make better connections with the Advisory Committee on Accessible Transportation. We have a list of people who are on that committee just so that we can work together on that. And let's see. And then we're going to have a meeting shortly. I just have to get everyone together so that now that we have all this past information and anything that we gleaned today from the presentations that are being made, so that we can move forward and create a mandate for ourselves.
Okay, that sounds great. Is there anything that you need from staff at this point to help you do this work?
It's already been mentioned that a conference line would be helpful, but I do know that Melissa looked into that. Like, that was a communication that went out to all of us.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, wonderful. So, do I need a motion to receive all the, can I get a motion to receive, and thank you very much, Monica, for the report. Can I get a motion to receive all the working group reports? Thank you, Stephanie. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that's been adopted. Okay, so our next item, and good work, everyone. I'm really proud that the working groups are now up and running, and we'll do everything we can to get you the tools so you can actually keep going. DE 15.3, Accessibility of Toronto with Love Events. Patrick Tobin is here. He's our Director of Arts and Cultural Service from the Economic Development Office, and he's going to provide us with a presentation on all the good work that they've been doing. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thanks, committee. Just as we settle in, I'll introduce my colleagues. To my left is Jennifer Tharp, who's project manager on Canada 150. And to my right is Alan Jazvac, who's City Cultural Events Production Manager. So we wanted to thank you very much for the invitation to present. There's a lot of detail in our presentation, so I'll move through it as expeditiously as I can. I want to recognize as well the good support we've received from the councillor and Nicole Cormier, particularly in ensuring that we meet your purposes. I think before I launch into the project, if there is one way to characterize our approach to this presentation, but accessibility more broadly, it's a process of continuous learning. We deliver a lot of events. We'll be focusing on Canada 150 celebrations this year in 2017 in this presentation. But at each event, I think we don't get everything perfect. We look at what didn't go exactly right as we would like, and we try to learn from that. And in that spirit, we look forward to your advice today to help us continue to improve. So turning then to the first slide, the objectives for the City of Toronto's involvement in the national sesquicentennial celebrations were directed by Council, who provided us $4.2 million against an almost $7.5 million budget. The direction was that our events should be city-led, should be as accessible as possible, as broad as possible, and both celebrate the city and countries past as well as where we are going as a community. With respect to the specific elements of the programming, the next slide shows the broad categories. We have celebrations planned, large, public, accessible, celebratory. We have commemorations looking back at Canada's history and Toronto's place within it for the last 150 years. to include the presence of our Indigenous communities. And we have exhibitions. A couple I would like to highlight. Doors Open under the celebrations category actually kicks off next weekend and is something with more than 150 sites across the city of architectural significance that we're looking forward to celebrating. Also below that is National Aboriginal Day and the Indigenous Arts Festival. So June 21, with a focus at Fort York, we'll be celebrating National Aboriginal Day in collaboration with our partners, Mississauga's The New Credit, and we'll be holding an Indigenous Arts Festival. Also on that day, there will be a sunrise ceremony at City Hall, as well as we're working with an Indigenous organization around a Moccasin Trail to help celebrate the Indigenous fact in Toronto. I'd note with respect to accessibility in a broad sense, as directed by council, all of our events are free. The next slide, I'll now take you through various elements of our accessibility, marketing, our production and design of events, et cetera. So first, talking a bit about marketing. We try as much as possible to ensure that we have accessible formats. And this provides you a lot of detail of what that looks like. It includes ensuring that the channels are fully accessible, such as the use of 311 for TTY customers, as well as design elements. We use very simple sans serif font to ensure its machine readability, as well as ensuring that it's crisp from a visual standpoint for those that may be visually impaired. We are doing a lot in terms of the accessibility of the online content to ensure that it's wave accessible, to include some of the apps and widgets that we're producing in marketing the Canada 150 events. The next slide just takes you through some of our branding. This is our, as we call it, iconography for Canada 150 overall. The brand is TO Canada with Love, so Toronto Canada with Love, which is expressed visually as three icons: a raccoon with a maple leaf and a heart. So that's TO Canada with Love. Turning to the next page, we'll move now to discussing how we design events from the standpoint of public accessibility. The first element would be ensuring that the approach is accessible. So we work very closely with Wheel Trans to ensure that we've got drop-off and pick-up locations. We carry that through to the placement and design of the washrooms. We have American Sign Language interpretation among our volunteers to assist with wayfinding. And all of our maps include iconography that guides people towards the accessibility components of our event design. I'd note as well that we are reaching out to organizations serving deaf community, disabled community, to ensure that we provide our information through the channels that would be most accessible to them. The web obviously is a significant component of our marketing, and this next slide just shows a mock-up of how we identify specific events and note their accessibility through the iconography you see there. I'll turn now to an example of some of our online marketing. This is just a sub-page with respect to programming to be held nearby at Little Trinity Church. And you'll see as it breaks out the information on the event, we talk about the public washroom accessibility, the drop-off, et cetera. So we hope that, again, this is the most accessible way to provide it. Communication of event information. Again, website is primary channel. It's mobile optimized and machine readability within those channels. We use recorded announcements at our public events to help people with the wayfinding. We're investing a lot in training the large number of volunteers that will be helping us to deliver our events. Within the division itself, the Economic Development and Culture Division, there is a suite for city staff of training related to AODA, and we are over 90% compliant in terms of our staff, and we offer a version of that training as well to our volunteers. Continuing on, talking about our outdoor events, Canada 150, the performance pieces will focus on obviously the Canada Day weekend at 4 sites across the city. So we've ensured that our stages are accessible for those who may need that element to access the stage, and we'll be providing American Sign Language interpretation both for that cultural programming as well as Doors Open, as mentioned, in a couple of weeks, and Memento, which is our brand for a series of historical commemorations that are being carried out across the city over the course of the 2017 year. Continuing with site and site amenities, as noted, we work to ensure that washroom location and design is accessible as possible. Rest areas as well are wheelchair accessible. Some of our sites, such as West Humber Bay Park, we're working with lawns, and so you're ensuring that you've got coverage and pathways that make that accessible for people in enough space, such as around the free drinking water areas, given these outdoor events. We're also, we have encountered issues in the past with cable management. So this is where we're holding a concert and we're running a lot of cable across, for example, Nathan Phillips Square. We've looked at the design of the mats to ensure that they are flat enough, frankly, that to allow them to be more accessible than some other versions. Turning next to parking and public transportation, as noted, we have Wheel-Trans pickup and drop-off locations for our public programming sites, and the wayfinding iconography both on-site and in our promotional materials dovetails with their own. We have accessibility parking for all of our public sites as well. I'll turn to our museums for a moment. The exhibit design that we're using is borne in mind accessibility. Our interpretive panels feature, again, a very clear sans serif font in large size to accommodate those with visual impairment. And we have volume levels for our AV activities that can be individually customized for the needs of the user. We're continuing, we have an event at Etienne Brûlé Park and Rouge Beach where we will be celebrating the Indigenous history on this territory with canoe-based events, and we are working to ensure that that will be available to those who need mobility assistance. Finally, I mentioned staff and volunteer training. The staff are fully trained up in meeting the AODA Accessible Customer Service Standard, and it's something that we take our volunteers through as well as ensuring that we've got American Sign Language competence among our volunteers who are serving the events. Finally, and this is noted off the top, is this is a process for us of continuous learning. So where we're not getting it right, we would very much like to hear from you and incorporate that advice into our event design. I'd note again that Nicole Cormier for city staff such as ourselves has proven to be an invaluable resource for us, being able to go to her and at early stages in design and think through issues that perhaps we need to think through more carefully. I think that is taking us towards a standard of event design and delivery that the province has been very active on. They've produced a guide to accessible festival and outdoor events, which they provide to the public, and for anyone organizing an event, provides them a very clear understanding how to design and deliver your event with maximum accessibility in mind. For us, we are starting down the same path. We've at this point developed a checklist for all of our staff to ensure that events that they are designing in delivering, meet the standards set here by the province in this guide, and that'll be a process that will continue to iteratively improve and ultimately achieve something akin to the guidebook provided by the province. So I want to just conclude by thanking you very much for the time. A lot of detail here. Should you have any questions now, we're very interested in talking those through, and certainly should you wish to follow up at any other point, I am available, and Jennifer and Alan as well. Welcome that interaction.
Patrick, thank you very much for that presentation, and I can see that you have been speaking to Nicole. So we are now at a stage where we can open up the discussion for questions of the staff. Stephanie, go ahead. You want to go first, and then Joe, and then Rahima.
Hi, sure. I actually have a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. Take your time.
Well, first, I just want to applaud. I'm really thrilled that you've got ASL interpreting at a lot of the events, so that's excellent. And the captioned video for the promotional video. ASL and captioning are not necessarily interchangeable as a means of accessibility. You have two different groups that access those means of communication. So my first question is, is there an ASL version of the promotional video or just the captioning?
At this time, the promotional video actually doesn't have a lot of, the video does not have ASL, no. It does have captioning, but not ASL. The ASL that we do have on stage is for the hosting dialogue in between performances. So that's what we have on the website right now.
Okay. Is there a possibility of creating an ASL version of the promotional video?
I think that's certainly something we can discuss with our marketing team.
Okay. And then my second question is actually about the captioning at events. So where you've got ASL interpreting, which is great, is there an option for people who are hard of hearing, who don't use ASL interpreters, but need to have some kind of captioning available? And there are different ways to do it rather than necessarily having it all on a big screen. Captioning, they do have the possibility of actually logging in online. People could use their cell phones to access the captioning, and they could read it on their actual devices. So that's my question, the captioning at events.
I mean, that's certainly an interesting suggestion. I think for Canada Day, we have not planned to do that. We are using our video screens as best as we can to make sure that we get as much messaging out visually as much as we can, but we can certainly look at that in future events.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I also now acknowledge Joe, Rahima, and then I see Yin. Joe, go ahead, please.
Good morning. Good presentation, thank you. You were holding up a brochure just there. I was curious to know what that was.
Sure. It's the Province of Ontario's, and we brought copies to leave with folks.
Thank you.
Guide to Accessible Festivals and Outdoor Events. It's both the set of policies that would govern their directly delivered events, as well as a resource for anyone, frankly, delivering an event that they would fund or even not. We find it's a very good standard of practice, and we are looking to follow this, but ultimately recreate one that speaks specifically to Toronto.
Great, thank you. The other question was, you mentioned at the beginning, this project you're running you received $4.3 million in funding, and that's?
The City Council approved $4.2 million, which worked out to $1.50 for each Torontonian, to provide to economic development and culture for the delivery of programming over 2017, which started with our New Year's Eve concert in Nathan Phillips Square, and will carry on to the end of calendar 2017, with obviously a focus in and around Canada Day.
Great, that's provided by the city, that money?
Yes, and we received also investments from the federal government and the provincial government, as well as some corporate sponsors, which have allowed us to work off a budget of about $7.5 million for the overall programming.
7.5. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Rahima?
Thank you for your presentation. I'm over here. Regarding your marketing materials, the font size is 12. Is there any possible way of making it larger? And do you also have marketing materials in Braille?
With respect to making it larger, we have most of the text is machine readable. We've worked to enable, particularly in mobile, for it to be expanded for readability. With respect to Braille, I'll turn to Jennifer.
We don't have Braille available at this time for our marketing materials. In terms of signage, the 12-point font is a minimum size, so it really depends on the type of materials that we're posting. So we do try to keep the font size as large as possible.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rahima. Yin and then Wendy.
Again, I'm also impressed with all the work that's been done. For the blind and low vision and deafblind community, we need to know, or is there anywhere on your website and your promotion material right near the top that you offer alternate formats? You know, I don't expect you to print everything out in 16 point or Braille, but if according to AODA, we can request it, but people need to know that they can request it. So is that very visible in your promotional channels? As well, the feedback mechanism. So I know you've done a lot of things to make it accessible, but not all of them may have been tested by the end users. So if somebody encounters a barrier, or they need to let you know or let the event coordinator know. So again, we need to see that somewhere. Who do we contact? Is it an email? Is it a phone number? Are those two pieces of information up front and visible and clear?
Thanks for your question. I'll take part two first and then turn to Jennifer for part one. In terms of end user testing, a couple components I neglected to mention. I was interested in the conversation with City Human Resources with respect to the employment levels of persons with disabilities at the city. We are lucky enough to have a fairly diverse staff to include those who would identify as being mobility, have accommodations at work around mobility. We use their perspective to help us think through event design and delivery, and that's been a resource that, at least for our event production team, has been very, very valuable. In terms of touch points, with respect to feedback, the information available online does identify specific staff with responsibility for the programming areas, and they can be the first people that I'd encourage you to reach out to. We will leave, our information is available with committee clerks as well as Nicole, and we're happy to take any questions beyond today's meeting. Should that be useful? So I think that in terms of touch points, and then.
I mean, it's more for the public, not for us. So not the public, when they access your websites or see the event information, if they wanted to give feedback, like they don't know, the city clerk and all that. So that's what I'm asking for the public. If they wanted to give feedback or something, is there something clear?
Sure, absolutely. Staff are identified on the website associated with specific events, and are the first point that we encourage people to direct any of their inquiries to.
And just in addition to that, we also provide 311 with a backgrounder, and that includes all of the contact staff for each event. So if anybody in the public requests any further information, they can go directly to 311 and they can put us in touch. They can put that person in touch with the right person.
Okay, thank you. Yin, do you have?
One more
Oh, yes,
piece.
please,
In
go
addition
ahead.
to that, we also have a protocol on site where anyone from the general public can contact any one of the volunteers. They'll all be identified with one of the event T-shirts, the TO with Love, and they're all aware that we have this mechanism that they can provide feedback right there on the spot that will eventually come back to all the city staff.
Alternate format request, like, is that somewhere visible or clear to the public?
So if we're talking about the website, our City of Toronto to Canada with Love webpage within the city website is all going through the same process of the web content management system. So I'm not sure if I can completely answer your question, but I do know that the city is striving towards the AODA compliant website, so they're providing as much accessibility through those channels as possible.
I'm not, I'm just saying when the public access information on these events, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if they see all the preambles from the city, but I think it would be very helpful to see somewhere near the top, if you need alternate formats, you know, please contact us, or you can make requests to 311, something that it's very clear, as opposed to expecting the public to go to another part where the city talks about accessibility. I don't know.
Yeah, sorry. I understand what you're saying. So we are still in the process of developing our webpage specifically for Canada Days and for the Canada 150 site. We will be adding more information about accessibility, because right now if you go to the page, it does not include specific accessibility information per site. So we will have a page specifically detailing accessibility details, and maybe that is where we can put the accessible formats.
Thank you very much. Wendy, questions?
Thank you very much for your presentation today. I have 3 questions. Is that okay?
Of course.
Okay. One of them is, I noticed that you have some events that have viewing platforms. So space that's set aside for people with mobility disabilities and other kinds of disabilities, I presume, to be able to sit in a space where they can see what's happening. But I noticed it's not all of them. So can you speak at some point to how do you make a decision about what event gets a viewing platform? How used are they? Are they used very much? Yes, that's my question.
And I'll turn it to Alan Jazvac, who's our manager of production and the expert in this area. But this has been something that has been really iterative for us. We've had issues with members of the public who perhaps shouldn't access those spaces, accessing them, and through Panamania and New Year's Eve, we've learned to manage the wayfinding and security elements of these sites. But Alan can answer your question with more precision.
In short, we don't decide which ones should or should not. We strive to make sure that they all have one. That's the simple answer. We want to make sure that every stage or every performance area has the ability for everyone from the general public to be felt like they're inclusive.
Clarify, they are available at all
Correct.
events that have stages.
Correct.
So there's no criteria for determining where they are or where they don't go. And in terms of people that when you're talking about, we don't decide who gets in and who doesn't, but you've been talking about security, right? So there's some kind of a process where, and trust me, I volunteered with something similar in the past, so I know the issues that you would face in terms of people wanting to access a space that maybe shouldn't be using it. But I come from a perspective of working with people whose disabilities are largely invisible. And so I wonder how you factor that into what you're talking about in terms of who can use the space and who can't.
We try to allow for more space than we could think would be required. I guess that's the easiest way to handle it, is because we can't make the space available for a very small number of people. We try to make it larger so that we can grow or shrink depending on the number of persons that need it. And we do so by making sure that we hold it with security personnel and persons that are well-trained with the AODA protocols. But no, we do not actually ask people to identify their disability. So we do have to take it on faith. We have seen opportunities where family members and larger groups of people are with a person with a disability, and that becomes a very difficult situation that we try to manage. You know, if there's people that may want to volunteer to be in another space, we may ask them. I'm referring to the able-bodied persons, or persons that don't have anything that's visible. But for the most part, we say, let's let everyone in, regardless of whether or not it's visible or not, and then we just deal with trying to allow for more space.
So it's a follow-up question. Do you have a written document on this? Is it something that you operate with, and is there any opportunity for this committee to provide you with some input on that?
Absolutely. We do have a document. I think we worked with Michelle a couple years back, so we can definitely recirculate that to you.
I have two more questions, is that okay? So I noticed in terms of the next steps that you're working on a guideline document or a guidance document around developing accessible events. And so presumably that's something that you will refer back to and use as a set of standards that you measure your events against. I wanted to come back to the point that Stephanie made around captioning and ASL. So, and I don't know that this is always appreciated, so I just wanted to reiterate it a little bit. So what Stephanie was saying about ASL is really significant within the community of people with disabilities. ASL is a language that's visual, as I'm sure you know, that's used by people who are deaf. English, so words that we speak and text that we use, is not necessarily their first language. So there's a cultural element to ASL that's really significant. And so that's part of what Stephanie was talking about. Captioning is often used by people who are hard of hearing, right? So who didn't grow up deaf, don't use ASL. But it's also used by parents. So I'm a parent, my kid is talking to me a lot in my ear. I don't get to see what's happening, I don't get to understand what's going on with the show, so I would look for captioning too. So there's a range of people that would use captioning. So just wanted to underscore that point, Stephanie, that you're making. And I wanted to tie that back to your guide. So I don't know if you could comment on when is the guide due? What are your steps towards the guide? And can this committee have some input on your guide? Because there are a lot of people here that could look at those nuances and perhaps pull them apart for you.
Sure, absolutely. Our guide, we'd be aiming to produce towards fall. Currently, given the state of involvement with Canada 150, we found that this resource produced by the Government of Ontario has been very, very helpful to us, and we've been focusing in on ensuring that our event design and marketing lives up to the standards that are here. There are some elements, given the scale of our productions, that this guide perhaps could be extended to help. And that's really the area that we're now working in. And so within a few months, we should be able to produce an in-house guide for our use. I think we would not look to replicate this in terms of events being delivered by Torontonians of their own design and delivery. And we've worked up a bit of a draft at this point, sketching out the areas where we think we need to extend here. And we'd be happy, through Nicole, to provide that to the committee and get your feedback as to what we may be missing at this point.
Okay. Yeah, please go ahead.
I think that would be great. I think there's a room full of people here who would really welcome the opportunity to bring what we know about how people with disabilities operate in terms of events to the guide that you're putting together. So we would really welcome that opportunity. I wanted to ask one final question, and it's about culture. So I noticed in looking at your events, what's being planned, that you are considering different elements of culture. And I wanted to just point out that there is also a culture of people with disabilities. So there are many artists with disabilities that operate in the City of Toronto. There are playwrights, there are sculptors, there are there are shows, and I wanted to ask whether or not the definition of, and I'm only asking this because I don't think I'm going to have another opportunity, whether the definition of culture that you operate with and that you use and that underpins your work, whether you recognize the culture of the community of people with disabilities.
The short answer would be we do. The culture, the definition as applied by City's Arts and Culture Services and in the design and delivery of these events is a really expansive one. We're currently in the process of seeking a UNESCO designation as a creative city, and really we work off UNESCO's definition, which is really any information imparted through living is their definition of culture. With respect to specific communities, yes, through the conversation around accessibility, but also in terms of artistic programming and practice that emerges from be it the deaf community or persons with disabilities. We're very active with the stakeholders that we fund or who inhabit our below market rent venue system. So there's a conversation, an active conversation with respect to the type of cultural practice that they'd like to see represented. And we've seen some really interesting best standards emerging from our partners. Harbourfront Centre, in the front end of rethinking their capital plan, brought in a visually impaired artist for a one-year residency to help them think through in a really deep fashion how they should think about their capital plan in terms of accessibility, but every single element of accessibility for them. We see that as a standard we'd like to aspire to, and we are in active conversations with our partners about issues like that.
That's great. I think, yeah, it would be nice to see something like that happen internally too. The events that are planned for this year, and I know, sometimes these things happen very quickly, but it would have been nice to have seen something that was highlighting the community of people with disabilities too.
Okay. Thank you, Wendy. Terry Lynn?
Just to say, Wendy, I loved your last question. So thanks for that. And can you just remind me what your name is again? I can't remember.
Sure. This is Jennifer Tharp, who is the project manager for Canada 150. To my right is Alan Jazvac. He's the manager of city cultural events production. Yeah. And my name is Patrick Tobin. I'm the director of arts and culture services for the city.
Okay. Patrick, you were holding up a guide.
Yes.
Can you read the title of that, just because other folks don't necessarily know which guide you're speaking to?
Sure. It is the Guide to Accessible Festivals and Outdoor Events produced by the Government of Ontario. It's available online in its entirety off of their subsite, ontario.ca/accessibility.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make that plain.
Okay, thank you. Darren?
I have 3 questions, if that's okay.
Yes, go ahead, please.
My first question has 2 parts. You had spoken about providing maps at your events. I'm just wondering, are those maps digital, or are they provided in hard copy? And the second part of that question is, if they are in hard copy, do you provide them in accessible formats, like a tactile map at an information table or booth?
Thanks, Darren. They are both available digitally for viewing online as well as download, and they are available in hard copy format at the events. To the best of my knowledge, we have not produced a tactile version, nor Braille, as noted earlier.
Okay.
But maybe next time?
Pardon me?
So we haven't for this particular event, no.
Okay. That might be something to look into for future events. I know that there is other festivals that provide tactile maps for the city, so it might be something to look into. My second question, with the performance components of your events, do you provide live description for people who are blind or visually impaired?
For some of the exhibitions, some of the memento events, we have handheld, what do you call them? We have tablets available for interpretation, and there is streamed audio content to guide people through the event. For events where there's speaking, we also have audio assistance that the individual can control the volume. For concert programming, no, we are not at this point offering, as is an emerging practice, ASL, for example, interpretation off the side of the stage, or surtitles. For the concerts, we're not at there yet on that.
Okay. And then my last question, and it's just some clarification around Ian's question from earlier around providing or informing the public of accessible formats upon request. And I think it goes beyond the website into any program guides, hard copies that you provide at the actual event, having a disclaimer on the front page or on the cover that says that it is available in an accessible format upon request, and the contact information on how to make that request. So is that available?
So I think at this point, I would say that we could probably do a better job for the website, putting it as suggested by Yin up top and very prominent, so we can return and look at our web design in order to try to meet that standard.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Darren. And anyone else who would like to ask questions? Okay, Yin, go ahead.
This is, like, we're already in 2017, so I feel like a lot of our suggestions may not be implemented in time, you know, but we hope. However, when you fund events and programs, one of the requirements, I know we in the city have, you know, statements like, you know, you must adhere to anti-oppression or anti-racism, you know, those kind of policies. So is there a requirement to, for events, you know, events, the groups that you're funding basically to adhere and comply with the AODA and the Toronto City's accessibility guidelines?
So in this instance, a decision was made by City Council, who were presented with 3 options for use of the $4.2 million provided by the city, as to whether the city would fund a series of community-based events or whether the city would focus on delivering. And the decision was the latter. So today's presentation focuses mostly on, focuses on what we are delivering, and we work to be AODA compliant, and, as we've discussed. But you're entirely correct. We do, outside of this scope, fund through a variety of community grant programs, community events. So Taste of Lawrence through a business improvement area, for example, or on May 24, Council will be discussing the 2017 allocations from the major cultural organizations program, which includes events such as the Toronto International Film Festival, Pride Toronto, and the Caribbean Festival. You are right that we require those recipients to comply with what's called the City of Toronto's Community Grant Policy, which requires them in turn to be fully compliant with the anti-harassment, anti-discrimination policy monitored by Uzma Shakir's team at Equity and Human Rights. We, with respect to their ultimate compliance to AODA, it is something that we ask to see and look for in their applications to us and monitor during the delivery of those events. But it is not, we do not, I think, require that they be fully AODA compliant, but work towards that.
Are we ready to move on to speakers to the item? Okay, so why don't we do that? Anyone to speak? Okay. If no one is to speak, then go ahead, yeah.
My you know, suggestion would be I'd hope that this requirement would be added to future funding of events, you know, and because I mean, it is the city, not just the AODA, but the city's accessibility, standards. I mean, it's right there. I just don't see why it's any less important than anti-harassment and all the other stuff, because we want to start working, like having our community, Toronto, know that they must consider that aspect, and it's not an option. So I'd really like your department to seriously considering adding that to future grants.
A very good suggestion and very timely. There's an active conversation around ensuring that recipients are fully inclusive. And so certainly that aspect is something we need to bear in mind.
Anyone else to speak? Okay. With that, I would move that we receive the report for information and also to offer our thanks to staff. I recognize that there is a lot of work being developed, but it also has now become a little bit more apparent that some of this work and development is probably lagging behind where you need to be in order for you to execute the operations that will ensure that the celebrations associated with Canada 150 are going to be fully accessible to everybody. If we can get to a place where that particular accessibility guide that you're developing will be incorporated in all the future event planning, so it's actually business standard on how we do things. There's a very comprehensive checklist that is then going to ensure that all the events is going to have a certain budget allocation to ensure accessibility. I think we're going to be in a place where we don't have to do patchwork and guess on whether or not all accessibility requirements have been met. If all accommodations are available, then everyone in the city will just know that this is how the city delivers these levels of high quality entertainment and cultural programming. So thank you very much for that. All those in favor of receiving the report for information? Any opposed? That's adopted. Thank you very much, staff. Okay, so, and of course, we're all going to go to many, many events, as long as we can get there. DI 15.4, abuse and misuse of accessible parking permits. Once we have the desk cleared, I'm going to invite Officer Scott Wiley to come to the center table because you're probably the best person to answer some of the questions that will be before us. So, Officer, I recognize that before us we have a report that was referred from the chair of the Toronto Police Service Board. Do you want to just walk us through very quickly what it is that you hope to obtain from this committee, and then we will, of course, be able to offer you some advice.
Excuse me. Yeah, the recommendations that we've put forth to the Service Board to have the city make recommendations to the province who issue the accessible parking permits. Some of the recommendations we came up with was a secondary physician's overview of an application. Unfortunately, the physicians and who can issue the permit, the chiropractors, nurse practitioners, unfortunately we find that there is some fraudulent issuance of permits. Within the province of Ontario, there's 700,000 active permits right across the province, and about 500,000 of those permits are within just over an hour of Toronto. And it's because of the exemptions we grant here. So we have a lot of chiropractors who will issue a permit to their patients that may be a temporary need but become a permanent need, or they put it down as a permanent. So there's no checks and balances there. So the idea is that we have the ministry assign physicians, overview the actual application of a disabled permit from the other physician, just to get a yes, this person does require either a permanent permit or maybe a temporary permit. Another requirement that we find is that there's a lot of, in our job, there's a lot of abuse of the temporary permits that are assigned. When you first apply for a permit, the ministry will give you an active permit for 3 months until one is issued to you from the province through the mail. And we find that they use it for multiple cars or give it to their family members to use because it's good for 3 months and they may have their issued permit receive that in about a month after the application. So there's a good 2 months of the possible abuse there. So we're recommending that they have to make sure, come up with a program to return that temporary permit right away when they receive the permanent one. And because of my job, we find a lot of the misuse, and the identifying factors on the permit are limited. And one of the options was to put a photo, like your driver's license photo, on the back of the permit. So it's for quick identification of officers who are investigating. So it's not that the picture would be on the face of the permit and visible. It would be on the back when we do our investigation, so we can come up and say, yes, this person, it matches the driver or the passenger of the vehicle. So those are the recommendations we've come forth at this point in time. I'm sure there's other recommendations that would be worthy to submit as well. There's our short list of these ones.
Thank you very much, Officer. I do appreciate that you've been very helpful in summarizing the main key points that we need to spend our time to provide you feedback on. So I would just open the floor for questions. Members, I'm sure there are questions of the officer, or perhaps comments afterwards, but are there any questions to clarify the request that's before us today? Or are you ready to just provide advice? Or we can also lump the discussion all together. I think this is going to be a complicated one. So Yin, you want to go first?
I remember this committee provided suggestions a year or two ago, but I don't remember it was to the police, but rather to probably the transportation department of the city. I just wondered, were you aware of those recommendations, or were they passed on to you at all?
I was aware that there was a meeting in regards to it. Unfortunately, I wasn't given the results of any feedback in the suggestions that were made at that meeting.
Again, maybe you can reach out to the Transportation Committee. I think it is, but we did have a rigorous discussion a few years ago. But, you know, I don't recall all the recommendations, but it might be good to dig that up and see what was recommended back then.
Yeah, I know one of the recommendations, and I believe a councillor mentioned it, the private councillors, was a secondary permit issued by the City of Toronto. And when that recommendation was put forth then, I think there was some misunderstanding on how that process would work. That's the only effective one that I'm aware of.
Monica?
I'm a little concerned about the secondary physician to review the accessible parking permit. For instance, the second physician might have absolutely no knowledge of the injury or the condition, and that would require probably an entire examination by the person who's requesting the permit. It also sort of implies that chiropractors and people of their skill don't know what they're doing. There's enough problems trying to get people to recognize chiropractic as an actual medical thing. How do you envision this secondary physician thing happening?
Well, our idea is that there is some sort of form or designation. It's not that they have to do a physical examination or have the permit holder go to a second doctor. That's not the idea. It's just to have the original assigning physician put in detail what the disability is and if it would warrant having an accessible parking permit. It's not that we don't trust the physicians or doctors in any way. It's just trying to limit some of the forgery and buying permits, for instance, because they are out there, unfortunately. That's a fraud issue that we're trying to work on with the ministry now, but it's just one way to reduce that fraud.
And does this include I don't even know the word right now, but if the second physician says, no, I don't agree with this, is there a way for the person to fight that?
There would have to be an appeal process, of course, and I just don't know how that would work, to be honest.
All right.
Go ahead, Wendy.
I'm trying to get my head around this too. So just to continue with what Monica's saying, I actually don't understand the process, so I feel a little bit uninformed around this. The secondary physician, would the requirement be for the individual who's applying to take that to a secondary physician, or does that become something that is part of the process? So they've submitted, the physician has submitted an application on behalf of someone. It goes into a process. That application then goes through the process to a secondary physician. How does that work? And I guess the reason I'm asking is because I'm concerned about there being, as Monica said, so a lack of knowledge on the part of the second physician. Where does the cost sit? So if there's a cost associated with that, who's going to cover the cost too?
The idea is actually it's a ministry physician that they designate, and the cost would be incurred by the ministry, not by the applicant.
So the ministry would designate a secondary physician?
Yes.
Could you go back just for a second? I apologize, but how big an issue is fraud in this regard? I'm really trying to get my head around it. So could you, I know that you gave some details, but could you give us a little bit more information?
Yeah, the fraud it's a difficult one to prove. The application process is a doctor's signature. No information on medical history goes to the ministry. So all we have to do is have a doctor sign the form and send it off to the ministry, and the ministry will issue a permit. Our biggest issue, that is one issue we have in Toronto. It's probably a 15 to 20% issue of fraudulent permits. Our biggest issue is the misuse of the permits in Toronto. And because there is so many exemptions, there has to be a way that I believe the city is the biggest issue. It's not an issue with the ministry. These ministry issues that we're putting forth would shrink down some of our municipal problems, but it's more of a Toronto issue that we have to develop solutions for in the regards to the misuse of permits in Toronto. Last year, we retained 1,350 permits from people misusing them. And that turns into, it's a Highway Traffic Act issue, so there's a charge municipally and provincially for that.
One more, just to clarify. So when you say misuse of the permit, you mean somebody who is using the permit's not their permit?
That's correct.
Is that mainly what you're talking about? Okay.
That's correct.
Yin, go ahead. Is there anyone else before we start moving on to second round? No? Okay, Yin, go ahead, please.
I really like the idea of returning the temporary permit, or somehow, even if the person only gets a temporary permit because the condition is temporary, that you require the permit to be returned rather than, leaving it with the person to keep. The fine, I remember, again, 2 years ago or further back, one of the discussion is, can the fine be higher so people would be a bit more hesitant to be misusing these permits?
The fine for the permit ranged from $300 to $5,000 under the Highway Traffic Act. The fines that are given by the prosecutors and the Justice of the Peace in court. They're the ones that determine how much the fine is, so the pressure would have to be on them to implement a higher fine.
Anyone else? Terry Lynn, go ahead.
You mentioned before that, like some years ago, there was a recommendation for the city to issue a permit as well as the ministry. Do you think that would be helpful? Has that gone? It sounds like that didn't go forward.
It did not go forward, I believe, at the time. I believe it would be helpful. Generally speaking, what that would do would be a change in the bylaw, so someone who would be just with an accessible parking permit would be granted access to accessible parking spaces. Mm-hmm. Someone with a City of Toronto permit would be granted the same exemptions that they're given now. So they don't pay at the machines, they can park in no parking areas. Those exemptions would be given to the people with a City of Toronto permit, so they would have two, a provincial permit as well as a City of Toronto permit. And I know they're streamlining the TTC, but it would sort of piggyback, the idea would be sort of piggyback on their process, and the people who would require it, the program would probably be able to be interchangeable between the two.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Any other question? No? Okay, Monica and then Joe.
I think you're going to end up with a lot of screaming.
I know.
City of Toronto one, because there are people who live outside of the city of Toronto that come in every day, so, yeah.
And I agree with that, and the problem becomes a congestion problem in the city of Toronto. It's not just an accessibility issue. I'm fully aware that we need more accessible parking spaces in areas, especially around hospitals. But I'll be honest, the accessible parking permit is called the golden parking ticket. And that's why there is over 500,000 accessible parking permits within an hour of Toronto, is because those people come into the city and they park wherever there is available parking. And they cause congestion, they cause the people who need the spaces the inability to park in those spaces. So that's why the suggestion of the City of Toronto permit, it assists the residents who actually live in Toronto and function in here every day, instead of just everyone who brings that into from outside the GTA. And it actually makes my job a lot easier, because without those exemptions, there's less abuse. Less abuse means more areas for people with accessible needs, that area to park.
Thank you very much, Officer. Monica, Joe to speak, and then Wendy. No? Okay, Wendy, go ahead.
So I'm still just looking for more information. So how do you envision the return of the temporary permits to work? Is that going to be something that somebody can just drop into the post box, or is that something more complicated?
There is right now, it states on the permit and the information they gave you that if you no longer require the permit or need the permit, you are to return it. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. So it would have to be either some way of going to a Service Ontario office where they drop it off when they receive their new one, or even a pickup option somehow through the ministry where there's an exchange made of the permanent one and the temporary one. There would have to be some sort like that, but not easy.
Yeah, I guess that hasn't been fleshed out yet.
No.
It's like this is the initial intention, and you need to look at the specifics of how that would work.
Yeah, these recommendations are to sort of make that recommendation to Service Ontario to at least get the talks going and start the process.
Martin, go ahead, please.
Yes, I had a question about the fine itself. Does the fine go to the driver that holds the permit at that time, or does it go to the person who has gotten the permit for their own disability, or does it go to both?
No, the fine that we do only goes to the person misusing the permit. It does not go to the permit holder. Okay. There are occasions where some of the permit holders allow their permit to be used. We could charge in that case, but I haven't seen one yet. So, no, the permit holder doesn't get charged.
Okay.
Go ahead, Yin, round three.
It's all coming back to me little by little, the recommendations that we made a few years ago. So one of them was different colors of the permit, so that, say, the police can just see, oh, this is a red one, so this is a temporary one, there's a blue one, you know? And also to have the expiry date very clearly at the front, so that if you're looking to see if this permit has expired. And also, I think instead of a photo, there was recommendation of a number where you can check, use that number to identify who the holder is. So, yeah.
Those recommendations were actually implemented in 2012. The numbers are there, and we have a rough idea, but again, you can't tell everyone by looking at them how old they are. So a picture is just that much easier for them. They did have different colored permits, and they do have a red one for a temporary one. They've actually gone away from that. Starting at the beginning of this year, they issued a new permit, and they're just going with a blue permit, and that's for all of them. And the number on the permit would determine if it's a temporary permit for us or not.
Yin, are you satisfied? Okay. Go ahead, Joe.
So the officers the parking officers, how do you actually make a determination that the permit on the vehicle that you're looking at the time is an abusive situation? That must be very difficult.
It is.
Just look at a vehicle and see the permit and determine, is this legitimate or is this an abuse?
It's very difficult. We can't determine just by looking at the permit. So my section where I work, I have 6 full-time officers. We go out and investigate misuse of parking, the accessible parking permits. We actually have to observe the driver and approach them and ID them so we can compare the permit to the driver. So it can be a long process. So if we believe there's a misuse, we will actually sit on that and observe it for a period of time till the driver comes back. I need a bunch more, yes, and I am limited to what I have, so.
Thank you very much. Anyone else to ask questions? We're ready to provide some feedback. I have a few questions before we do that. Officer, with respect to the requests from the Police Service Board, you're asking this committee to provide a report based on the following consultation and discussions that we've had today. I'm prepared to provide a letter as chair, perhaps summarizing some of the observations made, and also to go back and look up the previous discussion that probably took place in this committee 2 or 3 years ago, I'm not sure, but to provide a sort of a formal submission as the chair, but it's not going to be a formal report. Is that satisfactory?
I believe that would be satisfactory.
Okay, good. And so with respect to the request that's also on the table that's going to the province, do you know if the province is prepared to address this particular matter?
I have an upcoming meeting with them in June. They are aware of the recommendations, but we didn't actually submit anything to them, so I'm sure they're looking into their end of it as well. But I have a meeting next month that I'll have more information on.
Okay. And I think that simply because this issue is rather complicated and there's so many different stakeholders and how the street is used and whose purview it is to either actively enforce and the permitted type of uses, would you be open to having the Toronto Police participate in perhaps an interdivisional city working group that would include the Equity, Diversity and Human Rights Office, as well as Municipal Licensing and Standard Transportation Services, as well as the Toronto Parking Authority, who has the who basically does all the mandates around on-street parking. Do you believe that TPS could participate in that working group?
I think it would be welcomed and yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Wonderful, thank you. And the final question I have is with respect to the realistic timeline for a big system change such as this. I don't have enough experience or enough history to recognize how long it takes to review something as complicated as this. But in your experience, when was the last time the accessibility permits matter was fully opened by the province for full-on reforms?
I believe that was 2006, and it took, it was at least a 2-year program that before they were able to make some changes. The issue with some of these things is their Highway Traffic Act changes that have to be made, and that, of course, is something that they have to change legislation for, so it does take a while. I can't foresee how long it would take, to be honest with you.
And so then, also again, because I don't have the history, after the 2006 review and the reforms, and then obviously the new execution of those rules, are we now at a state where we need to do this again simply because it's actually produced some unintended consequences, or is it just a matter of fact that the system is time for another review? Like, has it gotten
I think it's more
worse?
just a time for another review.
Okay. So it's not necessarily that the abuse and the misuse has gotten worse.
Well, on a consistent basis, the abuse has gotten worse. I don't know if you can say it's gotten worse, but we've spent a little more time into it where we've noticed a larger abuse. And like I said, majority of that problem is a Toronto specific issue. And it's, like I say, it's because of the bylaw exemptions that are given. They don't have that same issue in, say, Mississauga because they don't grant the same exemptions. So if we can sort of work on the way we give the exemptions and how we do that is probably going to solve more problem than just a revamp of the permit issue, which does need to happen, but I think it's both.
And do you recall from the 2006 review whether or not the component of reviewing Toronto's exemption rules, was that also on the table for
I don't believe it was.
Okay, so we need to drill down there.
Yes.
Thank you. To speak, Stephanie?
Sorry, I just thought of one more question. On the person's driver's license, is there anything there that indicates that they are permitted to have, for permanent passes?
No, there's nothing on the driver's license because you don't have to have a driver's license to get a permit. Anyone in the province with a disability has the ability to actually have a permit, so they don't put anything on the driver's license.
Okay, because my thought around that is that, so my 91-year-old mother just got a permit, and when I drive her, we have it. If I were to think about abusing it, for example, and not have my mother with me, but if I had something on my card or don't have it, then rather than the picture on the actual pass, I don't know if that's too convoluted, but it's just a thought that came to mind because I know there's a lot of concern about the picture on the actual pass.
I know, unfortunately, your mother may have the permit, but may have 6 or 7 different drivers for that. So do you put that on 6 or 7 drivers, or they have a volunteer that drives them with that permit? You can't put that on the driver's license either, so.
Yeah, so I'll just clarify, what I mean is that if I was someone who required a wheelchair or a accessible parking pass, sorry, then I would have it on my driver's license. If I'm not, so my mother doesn't drive, I drive her. But if I'm, I know it's very convoluted, I'm sorry. If my mother is not with me and I abuse the pass, then it's clear on my license that I do not have that permission. I don't think I'm articulating it very well. So
And like I say, unfortunately, if we put on everyone's driver's license that they're not disabled, or if they are, it just, the province would never be able to control that at any level.
sorry, I don't think I'm really articulating what I mean, but anyway, thank you.
Before you go, Wendy, Rahima's next, and then I'll acknowledge you.
I just want some clarification regarding the permits, because there's 2 types of permits. One's for a driver and one's for a passenger. So this would apply to both?
This would apply to both. The permits they're actually the same permit. The only designation would be on the permit there is a P and a D. The P and D, if they're both on the permit, would mean that it can be used by a driver, and they could be a passenger as well. Generally speaking, the P on the permit is just a passenger and not a driver. Unfortunately, there's a lot of mistakes on the permits at the permit office for that when it's on there, so we don't even use that as a designation to determine if the permit's valid or not, because there is a lot of mistakes in that matter.
Thank you.
Wendy, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I don't know how relevant this is, so that's my caveat. Stephanie, and I came in at the end of what you were saying, so there was some discussion around whether you could put something on a license or not, right? I just wanted to say, I have a disability, I have a license. There is a spot on my license that says that I have a requirement to drive with a certain kind of adaptive technology. So there are spaces on licenses, there's where you can note things that are disability specific. I just wanted to put that out there because I know there was a bit of confusion about whether that was a possibility or not.
Like I say, that's okay if it's a permit holder and they're a licensed driver as well, but when you're having a passenger with you, there's nothing that you can put on a driver's license that would say, you're not disabled, but I can drive this person around, right? So, because the permit is issued to a person, not a vehicle. So that's where we want to try and get the designation of who the permit holder is, not who's driving them.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else to speak? Okay, go ahead, Darren.
Question just came to my mind. In terms of the eligibility criteria for getting a permit, is it restricted to one type of disability, or is it for all disabilities?
No, it's all disabilities. There is a long list of eligibility for a permit, and that, like I say, it could be issued by a chiropractor, so it could be a back issue, it could be like a non-visible disability. There's no criteria that's specific for permits. I mean, it's widespread for all that would need mobility issues.
Thank you. Joe, go ahead.
Just a comment. There are any number of good ways to determine if the driver, the vehicle, whatever, is eligible to use the parking spot or use the permit. The challenge is to come across the vehicle as it sits there and then make that determination. You really can't.
No.
So you really have to catch the person as they're parking there while they're at the vehicle to really challenge them on the legitimacy of using the permit, right?
That is correct.
Thank you very much. Anyone else to speak or ask any questions? We sort of merged the two opportunities together. No? Okay. Then what I'd like to do is I have a motion I'm going to put on, ask Janice to put on the screen, and it's specifically to ask the city manager to establish that interdivisional working group, and it's listed all the different, I believe, internal stakeholders that should be there, and also to ask the city manager to send an invitation to the Toronto Police Service Board and the Toronto Parking Authority to participate in this ongoing working group. I'm not 100% sure if there should be a report back date, but rather just ongoing monitoring around emerging issues and trends. I hope that we don't have this request from the committee sit too long on the city manager's desk, simply because you, sorry, not to direct to you, but that simply because the Toronto Police Service has now made it a current issue, they have now opened up the discussion with the province, and it gives us an opportunity to take another look. I'm going to do what I said that I would do is to also try to summarize the comments and feedback from the committee so that we could at least respond to the request from the TPS board by way of providing some preliminary comments. I don't believe it's going to be exhaustive. It sounds to me we've still got additional learning to do, but at least I hopefully be able to put a placeholder that this committee does have some feedback, but it'll probably need a deeper dive with the working group. And Officer, thank you very much for all that you do. The numbers are in many ways alarming. 700,000 permits issued across the province, 500 in the City of Toronto, and by way of your calculations, an estimate of 15 to 20% of them are resulting in misuse or some type of abuse, or perhaps there is even some fraud. Then we can certainly see that this is a system of service accommodations that needs to be dramatically reformed. And I'm not sure why only 2006, when there was a bigger review, did so many things seem to fall off the table, because it takes a lot of work to put through the consultations. It takes a huge amount of resources to try to bring all the different stakeholders together, and then in such a short period of time need to come back and take a look at it again. So hopefully the next time round, which is this time round, that we'll be able to sort of put forth a much broader, more comprehensive package. And I recognize that we're going to be heading into a provincial election, but I do think this matter is urgent enough. I know that even as the political masters in Queen's Park perhaps may change, and perhaps not, but hopefully this doesn't fall off the radar and we find a political champion in Queen's Park to help us carry through the reforms. Councillor, did you want to speak?
I just want to say I'm fully supportive of this approach. I think it's the only way, really, is to look across all divisions. Because, of course, the use of the permits mean we produce on-street, dedicated, accessible parking spots as well to anyone with permits. So they are given a exceptional access to on-street parking in our residential areas where parking is a premium. And so there is a lot of inter-neighbor disputes over really whether or not this is a legitimate use, and our own systems of when they are rescinded, when they're granted and how they're rescinded. It's up to the person who had it to voluntarily phone and say, we've moved. So we have to look internally at that as well. So I think it's good to have transportation services, all divisions involved, and parking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else to speak? No? Okay, so then we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? That's adopted. And Officer, thank you very much for your time and attendance today. Thank you for having me. Okay. Okay, so our next item is DI 15.5, Accessibility and Shelters. This was held by Terry Lynn, and I do believe that we have one speaker who's here, Emily. Anybody else who's interested in speaking to this item, which is DI 15.5, Accessibility and Shelters, please make your presence known to the clerk, and we will acknowledge you shortly. Okay. Emily, welcome again. You'll have 5 minutes. Begin anytime.
Hey, everyone. I come to this, I don't know if you guys got the email, but I come to this on a couple of different levels. One, I'm a survivor of the shelter system and went through absolute just nightmare experiences. Had my old wheelchair destroyed by the situation we were forced to be in at the shelter by shelter staff. I also ended up having to go to the city ombudsman, at that time Fiona Crean, and her deputy was Jackie. And it was an experience that I hope that no other person with a disability has to ever go through. The simple begging of warmth in the room, the simple fact that staff were not trained and still aren't trained to assist people with not only physical disabilities, but with visual and auditory disabilities. The fact that the computers in the shelter were never put with accessible features engaged, and when I was able to do it, they locked down the computer so we couldn't use it. The doorways in the very shelter being way too narrow, the kitchen not able to be used whatsoever, and we got in trouble constantly for having to travel the 2 hours each way to go eat at soup kitchens downtown because there was only a few in Scarborough, and we either didn't qualify or they weren't accessible, or the lift did not lift my chair. And that chair was about 3/4 the weight of this one. I come to this also as somebody who has a family member currently who is not only senior, she's 72, she is disabled, she is profoundly deaf, she has had medical complications since being in the shelters, but also she's my mother. And because of the inaccessibility and staff attitude at places like the Adelaide Women's Resource, which is one of the very few 24-hour drop-in shelters that's on an accessible transit route, unlike Sistering, due to the inaccessibility of the system and staff's attitude, I have been completely locked out of helping my own birth mother. I rescued her from 2 years of elder abuse and torture in Hamilton. So for these 3 reasons, I think that we need to start making a bigger push on SSHA, or whatever the designation letters are now. I deputated about this at executive committee. I've deputated about this before. It is absolutely ridiculous, and even the ombudsman process is very limited accessibility. I just ask this as somebody with multiple disabilities, that the shelters are completely inaccessible. They claim there's an accessible room at Family Res in Scarborough, which is where our situation was. But you still have a 2.5 to 3 inch gap at that time to bump up with your wheelchair to get in and out of the room. The room we were originally in, they originally were going to put us in a motel where even the motel office wasn't accessible. Lido Motel. The kitchen wasn't accessible, the laundry wasn't accessible, the room itself had no grab bars in the bathroom, we had no hot water. And then we beg and plead, get into the residence, the main shelter. And when I figure out how to turn on the heat, because we had to beg for heat constantly, they put a lock box, a tamper box around the heat register because, oh gee, well, the comment out of the staff member at the time was, oh gee, well, we don't want the cripple figuring out how to use the heat. That was the exact words out of that staff member. And the staff members would have been trying to help my mom for 7 weeks. We told them, she's staying at our place. We're going to lose our subsidy. We're moving. We need you to take her and get her a place. The staff's attitude was, at Adelaide Women's Resource, the staff's exact comments were, and I'll never forget this, oh, well, you're too crippled to help your mother. How can you help your mother? Oh, don't you have an attendant? I'm sorry, this is 2017, 2016, and when we were homeless, as of February 8th, 2013. This is now. This isn't 50 years ago.
Thank you. Your time is up. Did you have a final sentence or a thought
I do.
for us? Go ahead.
As people with disabilities, and my old counselor isn't here, Mr. Paul Ainsley, as people with disabilities, we must band together. We must make this better. I have stories of people with disabilities that have been through a lot, that are homeless, that have been homeless. Please, let's get this going. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Emily. Since I don't see that there are any other speakers to this item, we can just bring this right into the committee. This is a letter from Terry Lynn. Do you want to kick it off?
I think the letter is just essentially in continuing to encourage the city to make accessibility improvements in terms of shelters for people with a range of disabilities. And as we've heard from Emily's talk, there's like a lot that needs to be done. I experienced a situation right after I met with the Transportation Working Group in downtown Toronto. It was a very rainy day that day, and there was a woman in the washroom that was on the phone, had been on the phone all day with service providers trying to find shelter space, and she was unable to do so. And so I think the neoliberal understanding of services in the city is that, oh, there's places for these people to go. And we know that the shelter system is completely saturated at the moment with over 90% occupancy. And this is the case for both people that identify as men and people that identify as women. And certainly people that have specific access needs. So we know that the City of Toronto currently does not provide attendant care services. And this was a request made, I feel like several years ago on the Housing Committee as well. So I just wanted to make sure that remains on the agenda.
Thank you very much. Councillor Davis.
Next week, the City Council is considering the guidelines around the budget for 2018. And as you may have heard in the media, there is a report that requests that costs be frozen. And what that means, however, is essentially a reduction because of the increased costs of staffing and inflation for other non-staffing issues. So There was a motion moved at executive, which asked for housing and shelters, I believe shelters, but I don't know if it was housing and/or shelters,
It's just housing.
to be exempt from the budget target, the freeze target for 2018. And I think it might be useful, one, to make sure that shelters are also on that list as well as housing. But this committee may want to also request that any operating or capital costs that relate to accessibility initiatives or AODA compliance be exempt from the budget target guidelines. And that, if I can say that again, would form a motion. If someone else would like to move that, I would be, yes? Okay. I'm not sure, Janice, whether you captured that. Did you hear that? I will, okay, great.
So while that motion is being prepared, and I want to thank Monica and Wendy, both your hands went up at the same time, so you decide amongst yourself who's going to move the motion, but the motion will be prepared. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to the matter before us right now? No? Okay, so why don't we hold that down while the motion is being prepared? We're going to come right back to it. And let's just move on to DI 15.6, disabilities issues related to policing. Oh, actually, before we do that, I do have a question for you, Terry Lynn. Recognizing that your request is to have SSHA to provide us with an update, the last time we did this, we didn't have a date attached to it. Also recognizing that there's a request from Nicole to have them here, do you mind just putting a report back date to September 2017? It's a friendly amendment to your recommendation. Oh, sure. Okay. Okay, so we'll prepare that for you as well, and then you can move it when we come back to the item. So then let's move on to DI 15.6, disabilities issues related to policing in Toronto. Our officer Whaley has now left, but Terry Lynn, again, this is your item. Are there any speakers to this item? Is that why you're here, Emily? Did you want to speak to this item? No? You are. If you'd like to speak again, you can. So why don't you just come back to the microphone, and well, I'll start the clock for you when you're ready.
Okay, ready.
So we're now on the disabilities issues related to policing. Go ahead, please.
One major thing when you're with the police is that very few to no members of the police who respond to calls are trained in full ASL or trained in AODA or trained how to assist somebody with a visual disability or somebody in a power chair or somebody with a service animal. One of my friends who is deaf was shot last year by a police officer because he was begging the police officer in ASL for help. He was trying to get him to help him. And I speak of Andrew Loku. He was a friend. I knew him in the deaf community for 20 years. He had begged many times to have a sign put on his door saying, "Deaf person inside, please help." Use writing, use a laptop or something. This officer didn't listen to him. This officer went in there thinking that Andrew Loku was trying to attack him. I've had other friends that are deaf who have had instances with the police, as well as friends who are blind, as well as friends who are in wheelchairs, who have had their hands forcibly cuffed behind their back to the point where it's broken bones. I think there should be a larger mandate at the police where officers are not only trained for what they're trained in, but that at every call where it's suspected to have a mental health part of it or a person with a disability is the person being arrested, that there be someone available to the officers or information in their training that trains them how to interact with people that are deaf or people that are blind or people that are in wheelchairs or people with autism. It's a huge concern. I have friends with autism. My best friend who I've known probably 31 years. He has severe autism, and he's also totally deaf. And he's had problems. He's ended up in jail because he can't get them to understand him. This is a huge barrier, and I think the police service needs to be more proactive in AODA mandate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Thank you. Bringing it into committee, I don't see any other speakers. Terry Lynn.
Yeah, I'm just going to speak to the issue briefly. The Toronto Police Services Board created an external mental health advisory committee in February 2016 in response to calls from the community and the Ontario Ombudsman to the shooting death of Sammy Team in July 2013. There have been too many grave consequences suffered by disabled people because of the actions of the police.
Actually, Terry Lynn, before you, I apologize for interrupting you. I realize that you have a motion that you would probably want to table before you continue speaking.
Okay, sure, sorry.
And Janice will put that for you on the screen.
This will be an ongoing process, learning the order of things. Okay. Yeah, essentially I was wondering if people were interested in forming a short-term subcommittee to look at the issues of disability and policing. I'm aware that there are other, I have this written down as well, there are some other committees currently working on these issues in Toronto. And because the issues are so big and so current at the moment, that I thought it would be useful for us to try to do something. And I'm very open to what that something is, because one of the limitations is that I'm already on 2 subcommittees. But I do think that the issues are need to be addressed and need to be addressed systemically by multiple community agencies. And I feel it would be a huge miss for us not to try to address that in any way, shape, or form. But I wanted to obviously open it up to discussion.
Okay.
So that's the motion, but I did have a backgrounder.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm going to read the motion just so it's clear to everyone following the meeting. Or Terry Lynn, actually, do you want to read your motion?
Sure, okay. That a short-term subcommittee be formed arising out of...
That's not the motion. The motion is on the screen.
Okay.
Is that your motion?
Yeah, can you read it?
Sure, I can read that. Sorry, not a problem. This is a motion from Terry Lynn Langdon that the Executive Committee would recommend that City Council request the Toronto Police Services Board to provide a semi-annual update to the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee on the work of the Toronto Police Service, Disabilities Community Consultative Committee. Point number 2, City Council requests the Toronto Police Services Board to consider having a member of the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee participate on the Toronto Police Service Disabilities Community Consultative Committee. That is the motion. Any questions of Terry Lynn?
So that is the updated motion, which I agreed to, but I wanted to also at least raise the question of a short-term subcommittee.
Did you want to, but you raised that in your remarks, or you want to continue speaking to it?
Oh,
if the new motion actually captures the energy and the spirit of the intention,
yeah.
You decide on whether or not you want to continue speaking to it.
Okay. So one of the things that I wanted to ask the committee is if there is interest in forming a short-term subcommittee, but because I don't want to voluntold people, I didn't want to force that on folks. And then I don't know, I think some of the background information that I have is useful, at least for the subcommittee. However, I think that's something that I want to discuss first.
Okay. There's a question the question's going the other way right now, so Terry Lynn's asked the question, is there interest in the committee to participate? Yes, Monica, Wendy's hand is going up. I see Rahima, I see Darren, and I'm actually going to toss my own time into this. I think it's a really important issue, And I can't say I can see my way through to the end of the tunnel, but I think that we need to take a position on this.
Okay. Okay, great.
Okay, actually, we have Nicole, who's my also angel, always whispering. With the number of people who've raised their hands to participate, are we going to be in breach of any open meeting, the meeting rules? So far, we've got 4, 5, 6. No, we're okay?
Okay. Okay, presumably I was also going to participate, but if people are,
I did include you in that.
oh, okay, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
okay. Okay, so we have to cap that subcommittee working group at 6 then,
Okay,
okay?
Okay.
So, great. So now what we have is the motion from Terry Lynn amending her letter. Anyone else to speak to this matter? Okay, all those in favor of, sorry, go ahead. Okay, so if there's no questions regarding the motion, then let's cast our vote. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? That's adopted. And the item as amended, all those in favor, indicate your support. And any opposed? No, seeing none, that's been adopted. Thank you very much. Then let's go back. I think the motion is ready from Council. Oh, okay, not a problem. So let's move on to item number ID 15.7, City of Toronto Public Appointments Process. I don't believe there's any speakers from the public gallery. This is a letter with a recommendation from Stephanie. Stephanie, do you want to kick us off? Sorry, okay. I apologize. There are speakers from the public who would like to address this matter. Who would like to go first? Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, sorry. I'll be very, very brief. I've attempted to, I want to be on the public appointments for the TTC or there's a couple of other places, and I think members of ACAT have been trying to be on the central circle of TTC. And I think public appointments should not only be based on your quote-unquote school knowledge, but on your community knowledge. And there's a lack of community appointments that are from people with disabilities and also from the community of LGBTQ. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions of our speaker? No? Okay. Seeing none, welcome again.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I have met the...
Sorry, just to interrupt. If you don't mind, just with an introduction of your name, so everyone
Oh, yeah, sorry.
can hear you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Miguel, and I'm a regular at the Toronto Police Services Board. And there are different AVCs, agencies, or the city or committees. I do agree that it's time for to update or incorporate more people with disabilities and visible or invisible disabilities at these boards and commissions, because there seems to be a dislocation from reality. People don't see our reality from their view because they have not experienced our problems. So incorporating people like at the police board. I wanted to say something about the motion by Terry Lynn. It's a great idea to incorporate someone from this committee into the subcommittee of the Toronto Police Mental Health Committee, but I have spoken several times to the board. Why don't we have in your composition members of the disability committee, disability members in the LGBTQ community? Because one of the problems that we face is discrimination in several areas. So it is time for to exclude too much participation from the business communities, people who are friendly to counselors, and the people most important is the composition of that committee of appointees members. Many of them, when they read the names on the list of applicants, they seem to screen it out. Oh, If I see my name, oh no, he's a troublemaker. We don't want him. But they're missing out a great deal because I have experience from the lower end. I've been they're not in the lower level of society, in Regent Park, where I live. So I can provide them with so much information that they can help to improve our society. The way it is sad that we are prolonging the pain and suffering of our community members. So having members of the LGBTQ community and disability minorities will be a great input for our boards and commissions and arena board members. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Any questions for the speaker? No? Thank you. Bringing it right back into the committee, and there's no other speakers from the public. Stephanie, go ahead.
Okay, so in our discussions on our communications subcommittee, we're looking at two of three areas that we're focusing on, which is civic engagement and civic public appointments. So from our discussions, we realize we don't know enough about how the city does outreach to underrepresented groups, including persons with disabilities and vulnerable populations. So there are kind of two aspects to this, and we wanted to put forward a motion, but I need to suss some of this out a bit. So one of the areas, thanks to Janice, she sent us the video from a meeting in September 2015 when Matt Cowley from the Public Appointments Secretariat at the City Clerk's office came, and he spoke about how they rolled out a new website in 2014 that the city boards, agencies, and corporations use, and it's about the city's application process. So, and he at the time said he's happy to learn more about ideas for better outreach.
And thank you, Stephanie. Before you continue, and I don't want to, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I realize you have to move your motion.
Yeah, so so the motion, in order to move the motion, I just need clarity also about, is it the Public Appointments Committee that we want to come and present on their strategies, but also how do we ensure the city divisions are also engaging these communities?
Okay, yes. Sorry, go ahead.
I don't know whether it's helpful. I was a bit distracted doing this motion, but I know that the staff person was here this morning, and she had to leave. And I sit on one of the appointments committee, and I used to chair the appointments committee in the last, well, a couple terms ago. There is a public appointments policy, and I think your recommendation relates to how much outreach they do to ensure that there is a pool of qualified candidates of persons with disabilities who could be appointed. They do targeted outreach. Where, how much, I think it would be, I don't know. But I know for certain, sitting on those committees, that it has been very difficult to actually achieve the representation that we want on those committees. So it would be good to have them come and speak to us about the policy at another meeting.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor. Stephanie?
Thank you. So I guess the initial motion would be that the Public Appointments Secretariat at the City Clerk's office present to this committee on their current strategies on how they actively engage underrepresented communities, including the disability community, for involvement in consultations and involvement with and on city boards, agencies, and committees.
Okay.
Could I make one slight amendment?
Go ahead, Councillor.
Those are two different issues. One is consultation and one is appointments. So I don't know whether one is more critical than the other, but those are two different staff people required if it's appointments, they will be clear about their outreach and how they do it and how the public appointments policy works and the kind of representation they're seeking. And as far as involvement in consultations, we'd have to find someone else from the city manager's office. And maybe those should be two distinct presentations here.
So, Councillor, is there a recommendation to amend from you?
Yeah, I would just recommend deleting, not deleting, I don't want to delete it. How would I say it? Maybe it's a second motion. Be requested to provide an update.
Just by way of...
You know what? Leave it. Just leave it.
I was going to just say...
Because they do consultations in the community as part of the, you're talking about consultations as part of the appointments process. Yeah, you know what? I'm sorry, that's fine.
Okay, just by way of background, the clerks have reviewed this and was very helpful in preparing the motion. It is properly before us. So the motion can stand. If there was going to be an amendment, I think that's also okay. But even without any amendments, it's going to, I think, get you to where you want to go. I would just ask that perhaps since we seem to adopt things at this committee, and this is not the only place that it happens, well, we adopt motions and ask for report backs and staff guidance, and we don't seem to always get them back in a timely fashion. So let's, having learned that lesson, let's put perhaps a date to report back on this. And I think our September calendar might be filling up. Okay, so how do we feel about an October 2017 report back date? Yeah, so Stephanie, you're nodding, and so the clerk will amend that if there's no objections to that. So have that report back. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to this item? We ready to vote? Okay, so even though it's not typed up, you recognize that it's just been amended with a report back day of October 2017. All those in favor indicate your support. Any opposed? That's been adopted, amended and adopted. Do I need a second vote? Yeah, okay, so thank you very much. So let's go back to our last item, and then you folks can get on with your long weekend. This is the only thing standing between you and that long weekend, perhaps a little bit of more work in the afternoon, but beyond that. So we're back to TI 15.5. We have exactly 35 minutes to conclude this item. And Councillor Davis, you were working on a motion which I believe is now ready. Oh, it's still not ready. Okay.
Yes, I mean, what I'm not clear about is the authority of this committee to make recommendations directly to council. That's the only.
We send it along to executive, and then executive will then direct staff.
So this matter is going to council next week. So I'm wondering if it can go in the form of a communication from the chair, or.
Sorry, Janice, do you mind just, sorry, clerk.
On your microphone.
If I can just ask you to speak to the microphone.
If it is on the council agenda, you can report to it.
Directly to council. Okay. I think that's what you were checking out, right?
So then council.
The motion would be amend EX 25.18, which is the budget directions report, by adding City Council exempt all operating and capital costs related to AODA compliance or disability initiatives from the 2018 budget targets set out in 4A of this report.
So by way of adopting this motion, it will go directly to City Council next week. Okay. Anyone to speak to, any questions of the mover? No? Okay, so we don't, okay, so go ahead, Monica, please.
Just a little twist in my head. If for some unknown reason the council decides to put more money towards AODA, I know that's not going to happen, but do we have to have something in there that we don't lose that extra money if they?
No, the budget, just to be clear, the budget guidelines say everything must be frozen to 2018. If they're putting in more, that's fine. Then they are exempting them from the freeze. So I I think that where the complications may arise is each division will have AODA, or, like I'm thinking of the capital, which is, we know it's about $250 million that are, we have to address in capital requirements to meet our AODA requirements. But there may be funds within each division that are focused on accessibility. And what this will do is make sure that those aren't cut minimally.
Monica, did that satisfy your question? Okay.
Yes, it did.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else?
And maybe
questions to clarify the motion? Go ahead, Councillor.
Yeah, those are divisional budgets. So they may achieve a divisional budget of 0 in terms of an operating budget, but internally, I just want to make sure and that there are no reductions in any of the spending in these areas is what the intent is. Maybe we'll just make sure that when we speak to it, that was the intent.
Thank you very much. Joe?
Just a question then. Are all capital spendings for the city in any division, are they all specifically labeled an AODA thing, or could there be plans and projects for accessibility, upgrades, capital spending that might historically not be attached to AODA, and would we then be exempting those if we didn't, if we
That's why I
said?
put accessibility initiatives. I mean, kind of as wide as possible, because it's true, they're not independently identified either in the capital or the operating budget. So that's, in general, what I'm trying to achieve is that they should be exempt from having to have a cap on them, any initiatives, capital or operating. And presumably, and hopefully, we are increasing our spending in this area.
Okay, so thank you very much. Anyone else? Sorry, there's a lot of commotion to my right shoulder, and I'm just going to... Oh, okay. Maybe we'll just have to introduce it. Okay, so, sorry, while that's all being sorted out, if I can ask you guys to just lower the volume, but we're going to come right back to you. Terry Lynn, I just wanted to ask, I recognize that when in our previous discussions here at the committee, just earlier, a few minutes, a few hours ago, the request for SSHA to appear before the committee to provide an update on the accessibility in shelters, there was a talk of a report back date in September. It's not in your motion. Can I suggest that we amend it to ensure that we do have a September 2017 report back date? So we've all learned a lesson, put a report back date or else it never comes back. Monica, sorry.
I'm confused now because I don't remember voting on Terry Lynn's motions about the shelter. Is this part of that?
Yes, so
Okay.
Councillor Davis her recommendation was...
It's amending this one.
Is intended to amend this. I believe that the clerks have just said it may not be relevantly attached to this item. So while that's being sorted out, you're right, we have not voted on the motion that's in the letter yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Does anyone have a hard close down date for for this meeting? Who's got wheel-trans or accommodations waiting for them? Okay, because we're going to try to wrap this up. I believe it's just minutes, but just for Janice, for the clerk's sake, if you can just amend this motion to have a report back on September 2017 to the committee. It doesn't have to be my name. I think it's a friendly amendment. Terry Lynn will continue to take care of it. Yeah, Monica?
I have a completely different question about something. It doesn't require motions or anything. The people who spoke about the Canada 150 celebrations in Toronto, they left me copies of that accessibility for outdoor events thing. Does anybody want a copy?
Okay. Yeah, let's just pass that around and we can all take one. So this is our very last item. Councillor and clerk, do we have a resolution coming forward soon? So hang on tight. Why don't we take a 5-minute recess, and we'll take that time to sort this out. Please get yourself a glass of water, head to the washroom, and we'll come back in exactly 5 minutes. Thank you. Let's bring the meeting back into order. So we left off on DI 15.5, accessibility and shelters. I believe there is now a new motion. There's no, Councillor Davis will most likely be withdrawing her motion, is that correct?
No?
No, it's still before us?
So it is not an amendment of Terry Lynn's motion in 5.6, or is it 5.5? 5.5.
Okay.
It is,
we need,
I will move a motion to introduce a new item.
Okay, let's take that right now. Just read the title of your motion? Or
No, it's actually,
okay, so there's a motion to introduce new business. So should I take this one? And then, all those in favor of introducing new business from Monica? Any opposed? That's adopted. Coming back to 15.5, Terry Lynn has a motion on the floor. It's been amended to ensure that there's a September 2017 report back date. All those in favor of that motion, thank you. Any opposed? That's adopted. Thank you very much. Let's deal with that new motion, new item, new business.
Okay.
Monica, go ahead.
I move that the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee asks City Council to exempt all operating and capital costs related to AODA compliance and disability issues from the 2018 budget targets set out in the recommendation 4A from the Executive Committee respecting EX 25.18. Did I get right?
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Any other additional, do you want to explain that?
The purpose behind this is to make sure that any costs related to keeping us in line with the AODA and improving disability accessibility not be frozen or reduced, that it be maintained and hopefully increased.
Thank you. Any others to speak to this new business? Okay. I believe the clerk is going to just make a couple quick adjustments. We're already in committee, but we're almost getting ready to vote.
Can I just make a request?
Sorry, Darren, go ahead.
Can I just ask Monica to repeat the motion again? It was,
Sure.
Actually, hang on tight,
okay.
because it's just being amended.
there was a suggestion by clerks to replace disability with accessibility issues.
So there's a request for someone to read the motion.
I'm reading an old copy because I handed back the one I signed, so.
Monica, do you want to read the motion, or should I read it for you?
Oh, I got it.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay. That the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee asks City Council to exempt all operating and capital costs related to AODA compliance and accessibility issues from the 2018 budget targets set out in recommendation 4.A from the Executive Committee respecting EX 25.18.
Okay, anyone else to speak or ask questions? Go ahead, Joe.
So the word issue will cover building projects and the physical things and.
Yes, that was the answer of yes. Okay. Anyone else to speak? Councillor Davis? No? Okay. So just to clarify, by way of background, I believe it needs to be said, is that the budget targets that are contained in EX 25.18 directs staff and City Council to adopt a 0% budget increase for the 2018 budget process. So by way of Monica's motion is to exempt any AODA initiatives from that. So that's a good thing for this committee, because it means that we don't want to have the AODA initiatives or accessibility issues requirements to be exempted. Joe, questions or comment?
Claire?
I'm sorry to be a pain here. The original thing I wrote out was initiatives, not issues. So it's been replaced, we're going to amend it again with compliance and accessibility initiatives. So it includes what, a broad range of activities.
Okay. So the motion has now...
The capital budget, in the capital budget is where all of the building projects are.
The question was, Counselor, did you say that this motion to adopt as 0% increase or decrease?
It says exempt all of the, that these initiatives and AODA compliance spending would be exempt from the spending freeze that is being recommended to council. So in other words, it's saying, don't cut.
Yeah, that part was clear. The councillor was making comments. In her comments, I think I heard her use the words adopt as 0% increase for the AODA.
No. That is
Just
what...
wanted to clarify that when she said.
Where this recommendation exempts...
Thank you.
Exempts these matters from that guideline that is in the budget, or it's being recommended by the executive.
And I could probably help further clarify that there is the specific EX item that's now highlighted for you on the screen. You'll recognize that all city programs and agencies be directed to prepare their 2018 net operating budgets equal to the 2017 approved net operating budgets. So we're asking for an exemption, so we don't have to be, anything that's related to AODA and accessibility initiatives is not frozen. So if there is the rate of inflation and any other budgetary spending required.
Excuse me,
Can we,
Chair. I'm sorry to bug you again. There's also capitals in a separate motion.
So we can also highlight that as well, but I think you've captured it in the motion, Councillor Davis. Yeah. But I will ask that we have to read that motion one more time because it's been amended without you seeing it. Okay. We'll read that out as soon as it's ready. The final version is ready. This sentence has now been amended at least 5 times. But it's good. That's right. It's getting better. The enhancement. It's a service enhancement. Are we ready? Okay, so this is actually much, much simpler. I'm just going to read the new amended motion that's still on the table of Monica. It captures everything that Monica and the councillor wanted. City Council exempt all operating and capital costs related to AODA compliance and accessibility initiatives from the 2018 budget targets recommended by the Executive Committee. Okay, so any questions of the mover? Seeing none. Anyone to speak? Ready to vote? Okay. All those in favor of the motion? Thank you. Any opposed? Okay. Let the record reflect that that is unanimous. And that brings us to a close of our meeting. Thank you very much for your participation, everyone. Have a fantastic long weekend.